Hi, so this is the video of King Senwosret I, and I get quite excited about these 12th dynasty kings because they did some amazing things for the Egyptian people. He had a 10 co-regency with his father Amenet I. Cheekily enough, he ruled Egypt for 35 years, but he counts those 10 years as a co-regent as being king of Egypt. So in the Egyptian records, he's recorded as reigning for 45 years, but in actual fact, it's 35 years as sole king. So talking about 1971 BCE, so 3,991 years ago. In year 10 of his reign, his father was in year 29, and Senusret is fighting the Libyans in the Western Desert. Now, remember I told you there was incursions by the nomadic Libyans into Egypt from the desert. So they re-established those forts, those old kingdom forts out in the desert to control them, to try and keep them down. It was never anything that they would successfully keep at bay, but they just needed to smite them every now and again. Anyway, he's fighting the Libyans. His father is assassinated, and one of Senwosret's officials overhears the conversation in the royal palace about Amenet I's assassination, and his name was Sinuhe. And Sinuhe crosses the Nile, goes into the desert in fear of his life, and lives in the Canaanite region. So that's quite a famous poetic story of this Egyptian who leaves Egypt because he overhears the conspirators plotting to kill his master Amenet I. Senwosret comes to the throne, and he consolidates his position at the new capital of XII, which is just outside modern-day Lisht. In year 3, he rebuilt the temple to Ra at Heliopolis. So we're not quite sure if he replaced the mud brick pylons with stone ones, but he erected 2 massive obelisks to the glory of Ra Harakti. And this was going to be a big reform. The king was Horus, and Horus inherited the land of Egypt from Osiris. So when the gods dwelled in the nighttime sky, they shined and sparkled, but when daytime came, they had to come back to Egypt. They came back to Egypt as spirits, and they lived in the temples which the Egyptians built for them. So Horus was responsible for maintaining the temples. Well, we've got quite a history of the priesthoods here. All the way through the Old Kingdom, they became very rich because their lands associated with deity temples are tax-free. Plus, they were installing mortuary cults for kings' pyramids, and those lands are tax-free. So these priests were becoming quite powerful with lots of resources, and yet the king was still responsible for maintaining the temple. So the lazy so-and-sos weren't actually converting any of their temples from mud brick to stone. They relied on kings to do that. So Senwosret I decides that he's going to make a big reform, and he takes the prenomen of the soul of Ra comes into being, and he creates a new figure for Ra. Ra is now a falcon with a solar disk upon his head. And he calls him the Ra Harakti, the Eastern Horus rising. Now that Eastern Horus, remember in the creation myth, a mythical bird came out of the east and laid the egg on the mound, and the sun god Ra burst forth from the mound. So he's tapping in on creation myth here. He now says that these major deities, which I'm going to name, are now manifestations. They're Kepra, they're manifestations of Ra. So Khnum in Elephantine is now a manifestation of Ra, Khnum Ra. Horus, Horus of Edfu, Horus is now Horus Ra. Min at Coptus is now Min Ra in the form of a ram. Amun at Thebes is now Amun Ra, but not the powerful Amun Ra of the 18th dynasty, but the Amun which is depicted as oh, have I forgotten it already? Gosh, as a ram. There we go. Amun Ra at Waset, who is depicted as a ram. Montu of Waset is also now Montu Ra. Thoth of Hermonopolis is now Thoth Ra. The ram Helicalopolis is now a form of Ra. And Sobek at down at Crocodipolis is now a form of Ra. So what he's cleverly done is he's made a list of all the richest cult deities in Egypt, and he said, right, these are all a manifestation of Ra, and because they are, I'm going to annex those deity temples and I'm going to appoint my own priests. So he starts appointing his own high priests to these cult deities, and we must assume he controls those lands as well. The king is responsible for all the temple repairs and the estates, and he uses these funds to start repairing the temples throughout Egypt. He appoints the high priests to major Khepru temples, so all the ones that I mentioned earlier. In year 30, he celebrates his Hebsed. So the Hebsed goes back to pre-dynastic times, when they were in tribes, and the leader was chosen from the tribe, and if there was a couple of contestants, they had to run a course. Remember, north, south, east and west, because you had to be fit to lead the tribe, especially when you're hunting, gathering and foraging. And if you were unfit and you didn't complete that course in time, then the rest of the clan would come in and club you to death. So the Hebsed was about rejuvenating your physical presence when you was alive and your spiritual presence when you was dead. So the Hebsed is like a new coronation, a new life. And year 30, he would have been in his 50s at that time. And of course, I mentioned that he erected 2 obelisks at Heliopolis. But then he did something really different. Something for the common, and what he did for the common people was he gave them the access to the rites of Osiris. So if you had a relative who died, you'd have to go along to the cult deity temple, and you'd have to employ the you'd have to employ a priest to perform the rituals, and that was only available to really the hierarchy. Now Senwosret I is saying that any male person in a family can become elector priest for the day. He can utter the words of Osiris, if he knows them of course. So he can symbolically perform the rites of Osiris as elector priest, as elector priest, so a priest for the day. The funeral cult contract is the lector priest is there from the family to bury the elder who's just deceased, and that is an amazing opportunity. So how would it work? Because if you was an Egyptian farmer, how would you know these rituals? Well, we can only imagine that scribes who knew rituals, who copied rituals, assisted the lector priests, and they would have been a lot cheaper to employ than a priest from a deity temple. So now the commoner has access to the rites of Osiris, not just the hierarchy, not just the 10%, but now everyone, if you can afford it. Okay, so these are the great reforms of Senwosret I. Hi, so just a quick update on Sinuhe. He was an official who served Senwosret I, and also King Amenet I. According to the tale, his story, he overheard conspirators planning to murder Amenet I. And in fear of his life, he left the palace, he crossed the Nile, and he escaped to those who dwell across the sand, the Canaanite areas. He became a siccessful chieftain there. Many years passed. Senwosret I was on the throne, and Sinuhe was really concerned that he died outside of Egypt, so he sent an embassy to the king. And the embassy pleaded his case, saying he didn't know what to do. You were fighting the Libyans in the desert. He was all on his own, and in fear of his life, he escaped from the palace. Senusret I sends the embassy back to Sinuhe, saying, "Don't worry, come home. All is forgiven. You are my trusted servant." So Sinuhe comes to the court of King Senusret I. He forgives him publicly, and everyone lives happily. Now, why was Sinuhe so concerned about dying outside of Egypt? Well, because simply the duat is above Abydos, and it's also above North Saqqara. So only a spirit could pass through the duat to get to the afterlife. So that's why he was concerned about dying outside of Egypt. Because if you died abroad, you'd wander the earth for the rest of eternity with no rest or succor or anything. So this is just a little bit of an add-on, if I've forgotten it, in the original take. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye for now. Right, I hope you've enjoyed it. Please hit the subscribe button. It all helps. And I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.